I never thought a birthday gift could change the way I saw my entire marriage. For most of my life with Derek, I believed we were a team. We met when we were both young and struggling. Back then, his construction company was just a small business with a few employees. There were months when money was tight, and we worried about paying bills. I stood by him through every challenge. I worked long hours, handled paperwork when he needed help, and supported every dream he had. When the company finally started growing, I felt proud. His success felt like our success. That is why my birthday dinner hurt so much. The evening started normally. Derek reserved a table at a nice restaurant, and several family members joined us. I thought we were going to celebrate together. I even felt grateful that everyone had taken time out of their busy schedules to be there. During dinner, people laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed themselves. Then it was time for gifts. A few family members gave me thoughtful presents. Nothing expensive, but things that showed they cared. When Derek handed me a small package, everyone looked at me expectantly. I smiled and opened it. Inside was a pack of discount socks. For a moment, I honestly thought it was a joke and that my real gift was coming next. But it wasn't. Derek started laughing. "Come on, Lauren," he said. "You act like socks aren't useful." A few people at the table laughed with him. Others looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. I forced a smile because I didn't want to ruin the evening. Still, I felt embarrassed sitting there holding those socks while everyone watched. Then Derek did something even stranger. He pulled out his phone and showed several people pictures of a luxury watch he had recently purchased. He talked about how beautiful it was and how much it cost. According to him, it was for a business associate. The excitement in his voice was impossible to miss. I sat quietly and listened. Something about the situation felt wrong. Maybe it was the way he proudly talked about that expensive watch right after giving me socks. Maybe it was the way he seemed more excited about someone else's gift than my birthday. Whatever it was, a feeling settled in my stomach that night. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't prove anything. But as I drove home later, I kept thinking about that watch and the strange look on Derek's face when he talked about it. For the first time in years, I started wondering if there was something happening in my marriage that I didn't know about. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. Maybe the watch really was for a client. Maybe I was letting one bad birthday ruin my judgment. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. One afternoon, I was organizing some paperwork in Derek's home office. It wasn't unusual for me to be there. For years, I had helped keep records organized whenever things got busy. While sorting through a stack of documents, a receipt slipped out from between two folders. At first, I wasn't paying much attention. Then I noticed the amount. $14,000. My stomach tightened immediately. I looked closer. It was the receipt for the watch. What caught my attention wasn't the price. It was the note attached to the purchase order. The gift recipient was listed as Vanessa Carter. I stared at the name for several seconds. Vanessa was someone Derek had mentioned many times. Whenever I asked about her, he always described her as a client. According to him, she was simply a business contact. So why was he buying her a gift worth $14,000? I tried to think of a reasonable explanation, but none came to mind. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, after Derek left for work, I started looking through company records and financial statements that I still had access to. I wasn't searching for an affair. I was searching for answers. Instead, I found things that made my heart sink. There were expensive restaurant charges that didn't match any business meetings I knew about. There were hotel reservations in nearby cities during dates Derek had claimed to be attending work conferences. There were purchases from luxury stores that had never entered our home. As I followed the transactions, one name kept appearing. Vanessa Carter. Each discovery felt like another crack spreading through my marriage. The worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing where the money came from. Years ago, when Derek was struggling to keep the business alive, I helped manage budgets and expenses. I gave up opportunities that could have advanced my own career because I believed in what we were building together. I spent years putting our future first. Now I was looking at records showing thousands of dollars being spent on another woman. I sat alone at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. The evidence wasn't complete, but it was enough to tell me something was seriously wrong. For the first time, I stopped asking whether I was imagining things. I wasn't. There was a truth hidden beneath all the excuses and explanations. And no matter how painful it might be, I knew I had to find out exactly what Derek had been keeping from me. After finding those financial records, I knew I couldn't confront Derek yet. I needed facts, not suspicions. So I acted like nothing had changed. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I listened to his stories. If he noticed anything different about me, he never said so. Meanwhile, I paid close attention. I started keeping notes whenever something didn't make sense. If Derek claimed he was meeting a client, I wrote it down. If he said he was traveling for work, I made a note of that too. The more I watched, the more patterns I noticed. His late nights became easier to explain. His sudden business trips started lining up with dates I had already seen in company records. The pieces were slowly coming together. Then one evening, I found something that removed all doubt. Derek had left one of his tablets at home. A messaging application was still open. I wasn't proud of looking, but after everything I had already discovered, I felt I deserved the truth. What I found shattered me. The messages between Derek and Vanessa went back nearly 2 years. 2 years. For almost 2 years, he had been living a second life while coming home every night and pretending to be a devoted husband. I scrolled through conversation after conversation. There were messages about trips they had taken together, private jokes, plans for future weekends, conversations that should have belonged to a husband and wife. Every word felt like a knife. But the worst part wasn't the romance. It was the way Derek talked about me. Over and over, he described me as a burden. He complained about things that had never been problems before. He acted as if I was holding him back. In one message, he wrote that I didn't understand him anymore. In another, he claimed I was always in the way. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This was the same woman who had supported him through years of struggles. The same woman who stood beside him when nobody else believed in his company. The same woman who put his dreams ahead of her own. Yet in those messages, he talked about me as if I were an obstacle he was forced to tolerate. Tears rolled down my face as I continued reading. I kept hoping I would find something that explained everything. Some misunderstanding. Some excuse. Anything. Instead, every message confirmed the truth. The man I loved wasn't the man I thought he was. For years, I had blamed myself whenever he seemed distant or distracted. Now I finally understood why. His attention, affection, and loyalty had been going somewhere else. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room long after Derek came home and went to bed. He slept peacefully upstairs. I stayed awake, staring at the evidence in front of me. The marriage I thought I had was gone. The trust one had built over 12 years had been destroyed. And for the first time, I began thinking about what my future might look like without him. A few weeks later, the company held its annual gala. It was one of the biggest events of the year. Business partners, employees, investors, and their families all attended. In the past, I had always enjoyed these gatherings. They reminded me how far the company had come since its early days. This time felt different. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, hoping I could make it through the night without letting my emotions show. When we arrived, Derek immediately became the center of attention. People congratulated him on another successful year. He smiled, shook hands, and accepted praise from everyone around him. I stayed nearby, speaking politely with guests and trying not to draw attention to myself. As the evening continued, I noticed Vanessa moving comfortably through the room. She wasn't acting like an ordinary client. She seemed completely at ease around Derek, almost as if she belonged there. Every time I looked in their direction, I caught them sharing private smiles. It was painful to watch. Later that night, Derek stepped onto the stage to give a speech. The room became quiet. He thanked investors, senior staff, and business partners. Then he started recognizing individuals who had supposedly helped the company achieve its success. My heart sank as I listened. He spoke warmly about Vanessa. He praised her ideas. He thanked her for her support. He described her as one of the people who had made a meaningful difference to the company. The audience applauded. I sat frozen in my chair. After everything I had done over the years, Derek barely mentioned me at all. My contribution to building the company was reduced to a quick sentence before he moved on. That was it. 12 years of sacrifices. 12 years of loyalty. 12 years of standing beside him. And I received less appreciation than the woman he had been seeing behind my back. For the rest of the evening, I barely spoke. Something inside me had finally changed. The sadness was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. Clarity. When the event ended, I quietly rode home with Derek. He chatted about the success of the gala as if everything was normal. I simply listened. Once we got home, he went upstairs. I stayed downstairs alone. My eyes landed on a small package sitting on a shelf. The socks. I had never thrown them away. For weeks they had been sitting there untouched. As I stared at them, I realized they represented much more than a cheap gift. They represented how little value Derek placed on me. Not just on my birthday. In our marriage. I could have confronted him right then. I could have demanded answers. I could have exposed everything I knew. Instead, I made a different choice. A calm choice. A permanent choice. I wasn't going to fight for someone who no longer respected me. I wasn't going to beg for honesty or loyalty. That night, while the house sat silent around me, I made a decision that would change the rest of my life. I was going to leave, but I was going to do it carefully, patiently, and entirely on my own terms. After making my decision, I stopped focusing on what Derek was doing and started focusing on myself. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of direction. I knew leaving a 12-year marriage wasn't something I could do overnight. I needed to be smart about it. Over the following weeks, I quietly began preparing. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney in a nearby city where nobody knew me. I didn't tell friends or family. I wanted everything kept private until I was ready. Walking into that office was one of the hardest things I had ever done. The attorney listened carefully as I explained my situation. I brought documents showing my involvement in the company during its early years. I had saved records from long ago because I always believed in staying organized. What I thought would be a short meeting lasted several hours. The attorney was interested in far more than I expected. He explained that my years of work and contributions mattered. The company wasn't simply Derek's success story. There was evidence showing that I had played an important role in helping it grow. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. A few days later, I met with a financial advisor. Together, we reviewed account statements, business records, tax documents, and other financial information. That was when I learned something surprising. While reviewing recent transactions, the advisor noticed several unusual patterns. There were payments that lacked proper documentation. There were expenses that didn't appear to have legitimate business purposes. Some financial decisions seemed careless and risky. The more we examined the records, the more questions appeared. Nothing was officially determined at that point, but it became clear that Derek had been making choices that could create serious problems in the future. I left that meeting with a thick folder under my arm and a completely different understanding of the situation. The man who always acted like he controlled everything wasn't nearly as careful as he wanted people to believe. From that moment forward, I became extremely organized. Every receipt was copied and stored. Every account statement was placed in a secure file. Every financial record was reviewed carefully. I created folders, timelines, and notes. The process wasn't exciting, but it gave me confidence. Each document helped me understand exactly where I stood. Meanwhile, life at home continued as usual. Derek remained distracted by his own priorities and barely noticed the changes in me. That worked in my favor. The less attention he paid, the easier it was for me to prepare. As the weeks passed, my fear slowly began to disappear. It was replaced by patience. I no longer felt the need to rush. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I wasn't trying to get revenge. I was building a foundation for the next chapter of my life. And with every document I collected and every meeting I attended, I moved one step closer to freedom. The day finally came. For months, I had prepared quietly. Every meeting had been completed. Every document had been organized. Every important decision had been made. Now it was time to leave. I chose a morning when Derek was scheduled to be away for several hours. As soon as he left the house, I got to work. A moving company arrived exactly on time. The process felt strange. For years, that house had been my home. Every room held memories. Some were happy. Others were painful. But I didn't allow myself to get emotional. I packed only what belonged to me and what I was legally entitled to take. By early afternoon, everything was loaded. Before leaving, I walked through the house one final time. The rooms felt empty. So did my feelings. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I simply knew it was over. Then I walked out the front door and never looked back. That evening, I settled into my new apartment. It wasn't a mansion or anything extravagant, but it was beautiful. For the first time in a very long time, I felt peaceful. There was no tension, no pretending, no wondering where Derek was or what he was hiding. Just silence. And somehow, the silence felt comforting. The next morning, my phone started ringing. I looked at the screen. Derek. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call came. Then another. Then text messages. At first, he seemed confused. He wanted to know where I was. He asked why some of my belongings were missing. He assumed I needed space and would eventually come home. He had no idea what was actually happening. I didn't respond. Instead, my attorney handled everything exactly as planned. Later that day, Derek received official divorce papers. That was when the situation became real for him. I learned afterward that he was completely shocked. He called repeatedly. He sent messages asking to talk. He demanded explanations. But those conversations were no longer mine to manage. Everything now went through legal channels. A few days later, he discovered I had already secured strong legal representation and established my own living arrangements. The process wasn't rushed. It wasn't emotional. It was organized, careful, complete. That realization seemed to affect him more than my departure itself. For years, Derek had viewed me as someone who would always stay. Someone predictable. Someone who would keep forgiving and accepting whatever he did. Now he was learning something different. He had never really understood me at all. The woman he thought would never leave had already built a new life before he even realized the marriage was ending. As I sat in my apartment one evening, looking out the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief. Not because everything was finished. There was still a long road ahead. But because I had finally chosen myself. And no matter what happened next, I knew I would never allow anyone to make me feel small again. The weeks after the divorce filing were very different for Derek and me. While I focused on building a new routine, his life seemed to become more complicated every day. The legal process required both sides to provide financial information and business records. As various documents were reviewed, questions began to surface about decisions Derek had made over the past few years. Some business partners were surprised by what they learned. Several expenses appeared difficult to explain. Certain transactions attracted unwanted attention. Meetings that were once simple became tense. People who had trusted Derek without question started asking for details and documentation. For the first time, he couldn't simply brush concerns aside. Word spread among a few key people within the company that things were not running as smoothly as everyone had believed. The confident image Derek had worked so hard to build was beginning to crack. At the same time, his relationship with Vanessa seemed to be changing. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she was no longer appearing by his side as often. The excitement that once surrounded their relationship seemed to fade when real problems entered the picture. Business challenges, legal expenses, and constant stress were not nearly as attractive as expensive gifts and luxury dinners. The more pressure Derek faced, the more distant Vanessa became. Meanwhile, my own life was moving in a completely different direction. I started creating routines that belonged entirely to me. I joined a local fitness center. I spent time reading again. I reconnected with hobbies that I had abandoned years earlier, when most of my energy was focused on supporting Derek and the company. Little by little, I started feeling stronger. Not just emotionally. As a person. Friends who had worried about me after the separation began noticing the difference. They commented on how much happier I seemed. Some told me I looked younger. Others said they had never seen me this confident before. Their words surprised me. For so many years, I had measured my value through my marriage and the role I played in Derek's life. Now I was learning to see myself differently. One afternoon, I met an old friend for lunch. After talking for an hour, she smiled and shook her head. "I honestly didn't think you would leave," she admitted. I laughed softly. Neither did I. But it was true. The version of me who would have stayed no longer existed. Every day I became more comfortable standing on my own. As my confidence grew, Derek's situation seemed to grow worse. For years, he believed he held all the power in our relationship. Now he was learning a difficult lesson. The foundation he thought would always support him was gone. And while his carefully built world started showing cracks, I was finally building a life that belonged entirely to me. As the divorce process continued, more information came to light. What had started as a simple separation was becoming a detailed review of our entire financial history. My attorneys presented records that stretched back many years. There were old business plans, financial reports, loan applications, tax documents, and company records. Many of those documents contained my name. For years, I had never asked for recognition. I simply did what needed to be done. Now those records were telling a story that couldn't be ignored. They showed the countless hours I spent helping organize finances when the company was struggling. They showed my involvement in major decisions during the early years. They showed sacrifices I had made while Derek focused on growing the business. The evidence was clear. The company had not been built by one person alone. During several negotiation meetings, Derek was forced to sit and listen as those facts were presented. I watched his expression change more than once. For years, he had acted as if my contributions were small or unimportant. Now official records were proving otherwise. The truth was written on paper. No excuses could change it. Outside the legal process, something else was happening. Family members who had once viewed our marriage from a distance were finally learning what had really taken place. Some had heard pieces of the story before, but they never understood the full picture. Now they were connecting the dots. They remembered the birthday dinner. They remembered the cheap socks. At the time, some had dismissed it as a bad joke. Now they saw it differently. They realized it wasn't an isolated moment. It reflected a much larger pattern of disrespect. Several relatives reached out to me privately. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others admitted they never understood how much I had endured. Their support meant a lot, even though I wasn't looking for sympathy. One particular item continued appearing throughout the negotiations. The watch. That expensive gift had once been hidden behind excuses and vague explanations. Now it was being examined alongside other financial records. The purchase stood out for all the wrong reasons. What was once presented as something harmless now looked very different when viewed alongside everything else. The watch had become more than a luxury item. It represented poor judgment, dishonesty, and choices that damaged both a marriage and a business. As more facts became impossible to deny, Derek's confidence seemed to disappear. The man who once laughed at my feelings now had very little to say. For me, the experience was surprisingly calm. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't enjoy watching him struggle. What mattered most was something much simpler. The truth was finally being acknowledged. For years, my efforts had been overlooked. My sacrifices had been minimized. My value had been questioned. Now the facts spoke for themselves. And for the first time in a very long time, I no longer felt invisible. Several months passed, and the changes in Derek's life became impossible to ignore. The image he had spent years creating was fading. People who once admired him were becoming more distant. Business conversations that used to come easily now felt strained. Some professional relationships never fully recovered from the problems that had surfaced. But the biggest change came from somewhere else. One afternoon, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Vanessa was no longer involved in Derek's life. The relationship that had seemed so important to him had quietly fallen apart. At first, I wasn't surprised. Their connection had been built during a period when everything appeared successful and exciting. Once difficulties began piling up, things changed. Eventually, she walked away. Just like that, the woman Derek had risked his marriage for was gone. I expected to feel satisfied when I heard the news. Instead, I felt nothing. My life had moved forward. What happened between them no longer affected me. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Derek. He asked if we could meet and talk. For a long time, I stared at the message without responding. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet him at a quiet coffee shop. When I arrived, he already looked different. Not physically. There was simply less confidence in him than before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he began talking. He admitted he had made mistakes. Not small mistakes. Life-changing mistakes. He said he spent months thinking about everything that had happened. He talked about the choices he wished he could take back. Then he said something I never expected to hear. He thanked me. He acknowledged the years I spent supporting him. He admitted he had never fully appreciated everything I had done. He spoke about the sacrifices I made and the loyalty I showed. For years, those were the words I had wanted to hear. Yet sitting there across from him, they no longer carried the same power. Finally, he asked if there was any chance we could start over. I looked at him quietly for a few seconds. The old version of me might have been tempted. The woman who constantly gave second chances. The woman who believed love alone could fix everything. But that woman no longer existed. Over the past year, I had learned something important. My worth did not depend on whether someone chose to value me. I already had value. I didn't need Derek's approval to see it. I thanked him for his honesty. I accepted his apology. But I told him the truth. Some things can be forgiven without being repaired. Some doors close for a reason. His eyes filled with disappointment, but he nodded. I stood, wished him well, and walked away. This time, there was no sadness. No hesitation. No regret. Only certainty. I finally understood what I deserved. And I was never willing to settle for less again. 1 year later, my life looked completely different. Not because I had spent the year trying to get revenge. Not because I wanted Derek to suffer. But because I finally started investing in myself. After the divorce was finalized, I used part of my settlement to create something I had dreamed about for years. I launched a consulting firm that helped small businesses improve their financial organization and long-term planning. It wasn't easy in the beginning. Building something from the ground up required patience and hard work. But this time, every success belonged to me. Every client I gained. Every goal I achieved. Every milestone I reached. It all came from my own efforts. The experience was incredibly rewarding. The same skills I had spent years using behind the scenes were now helping other business owners grow their companies. My confidence continued to grow with every passing month. Financial independence gave me freedom, but it wasn't the most important thing I gained. Peace was. For the first time in many years, my life felt calm. There were no secrets. No disappointments waiting around the corner. No constant feeling that something wasn't right. I woke up each morning excited about the future instead of worrying about the past. The friendships in my life became stronger too. The people around me genuinely cared about my happiness. They celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. Being surrounded by honest people reminded me how healthy relationships are supposed to feel. Occasionally, I would hear updates about Derek through mutual connections. I never asked for them. The information simply found its way to me. From what I understood, he spent a lot of time reflecting on the choices that had changed his life. The future he once imagined had disappeared. The marriage he took for granted was gone. And the loyalty he had overlooked could never be replaced. But those thoughts no longer belonged to me. I wasn't interested in watching his regrets. I was too busy enjoying my own future. One evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment after finishing a long day of work. The sun was setting, and the city lights were beginning to appear. As I looked around, I realized something important. The greatest victory had never been proving Derek wrong. It wasn't winning negotiations. It wasn't exposing lies. It wasn't watching consequences catch up to him. The greatest victory was creating a life that made the past irrelevant. A life filled with purpose, stability, and happiness. A life where I respected myself enough to walk away from someone who didn't value me. Looking back, I sometimes think about those cheap socks. At the time, they felt like the ultimate insult. Now I see them differently. They were the moment that opened my eyes. The moment that pushed me toward a better future. And if I learned anything from the entire experience, it's this. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is not revenge. It's leaving, rebuilding, and never looking back.